Republicans currently have a 71% chance of winning the U.S. Senate in 2026. This comes after they won a majority of 53 seats back in 2024. And so in this video, we'll be taking a look at the 2026 Senate map based on the betting market in every single state. And we'll be using Kalshi as our source for market odds. And so we're just going to get right into it, starting off with the solid states for both parties. These are races where the Democrats or the Republicans have a 90% chance of winning or more. And so starting off with the safe red states, we have Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. Meanwhile, for the Democrats, they're going to easily take Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and even Virginia, where it doesn't look like Glenn Youngkin is actually going to run for the seat. And so this means that Democrats and Mark Warner have a 92% chance of securing victory. Mark Warner is now running for a fourth term in office. And so with these solid states filled in for both parties, Republicans lead with 45 seats, Democrats trail at 43. We're now going to move on to the likely states where either the Democrats or the Republicans have between an 80 to a 90% chance of winning. These states are going to be slightly more competitive, but you can still pretty reasonably expect them to go one way or the other. And so we'll begin in Minnesota, where Democrats have an 89% chance of winning, just under the 90% threshold for the state to be solid. Democrats are running without their incumbent Senator Tina Smith, who has chosen to retire instead of running for re-election. And so we have a very competitive Democratic primary. We don't know who the nominee is going to be yet, but ultimately Democrats are heavily favored to hold on to the state, even though their performance with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz was nothing to be envious of back in 2024. And the other likely state on our map will be Alaska, where Dan Sullivan is likely to pull through. He has an 80% chance of winning re-election to a third term, possibly against Mary Peltola. Mary Peltola is really the only Democrat in this race that has a chance of winning. She is a former rep who defeated Nick Begich and Sarah Palin back in 2022 to serve one term after being removed from office in 2024, voted out in the presidential election. And so since then, she is trying to get back to Congress. She is trying to get now into the Senate, but ultimately Dan Sullivan is the favorite here, and he should be reelected to another 6-year term. So Alaska will be the other likely state on the map, and it will be red. And so we now have just 10 races remaining. They're all going to be classified as lean or tilt. And so we're going to begin with the lean states. These are states where either candidate has between a 70 to an 80% chance of winning. What you have to remember is that we're talking about odds here. A 75% chance of something happening is probable, but it is by no means a guarantee. And so we're going to begin in Nebraska, where Pete Ricketts is running for a full term in the Senate. He was appointed back in 2023 to fill the vacancy left by Ben Sasse. He is now being challenged by independent candidate Dan Osborne, who came very close to winning in 2024 against Deb Fischer. It was an impressive performance. Fischer won by less than 7 points. And so in 2026, Pete Ricketts has a 79% chance of winning. Democrats are at 3, and this is because people are betting no on Ricketts, and that is how they really in reality bet in favor of Dan Osborne. And so that is why you see such a significant gap here. The numbers don't add up to 100, as we do have a 20% chance that Osborne is going to win this race. And so Nebraska will be the first lean state on the map, and it will be lean in favor of the GOP. Moving on over to Michigan, Democrats have lost their incumbency advantage here with Gary Peters out of the race after 2 terms in the Senate, almost losing in 2020. He will not be seeking a third term in the upper chamber of Congress, and so this gives Democrats a 79% chance of holding on to the seat. We don't even know who the Democratic nominee is going to be yet. We have 3 big candidates, all pretty equally in the running, but technically Haley Stevens, her odds are the highest at 40%. On the Republican side, though, the GOP is coalescing around Mike Rogers. He's already received the endorsement of President Trump, and he is the strongest possible nominee for the GOP here. He is a former U.S. representative. He served in Congress for 14 years and was very close to winning in 2024 when Republicans barely gave him any funding. He lost to Alyssa Slotkin by less than half a percentage point. This race was closer than anyone could have expected. Slotkin was supposed to win by a likely margin, but ultimately Mike Rogers pulled off a dark horse performance, and if he actually gets adequate funding this time, he could launch a viable campaign that can actually flip Michigan. And so for now, based on the odds, Democrats have a 79% chance of winning, but ultimately I can see this race getting significantly closer. Coming on down now to Georgia, we have another one of the biggest races of next year. The Peach State will be incredibly competitive. Democrats currently hold the incumbency with Jon Ossoff in the seat. He was elected in a runoff in 2021 against David Perdue, and he, along with Raphael Warnock, gave Joe Biden the Senate majority when he was elected to his term. And so Jon Ossoff is now running for a second term, and he has a 79% chance of winning. Republicans are likely to nominate Mike Collins. Mike Collins has received the endorsement of President Trump, so the GOP is coalescing around Collins. He's a former trucker and a current member of the House. And this campaign between Collins and Ossoff is likely to get more competitive as the months go on, as the name recognition for Collins goes up in the state. Georgia still does lean more in favor of the GOP than in favor of the Democrats. Donald Trump won Georgia back in 2024. He might have lost it in 2020, but if we look at the gubernatorial races, Brian Kemp easily swept Stacey Abrams in 2022. Georgia still does prefer Republicans ever so slightly, but for now, because Jon Ossoff and the Democrats hold that incumbency advantage, Georgia will be placed into the lean Democratic category. Coming back up to New Hampshire, this is one of the most exciting races in the country, as we now have potentially two former U.S. senators in the running for the GOP nomination. Now, on the Democratic side, Jeanne Shaheen has chosen to not run for re-election after 3 terms, and so the Democratic nomination will very likely go to Chris Pappas. Meanwhile, on the GOP side, we have 2 former senators that will be dueling it out. First, we have Scott Brown, who has already announced his candidacy. He is a former U.S. Senator from Massachusetts. He served for 3 years before being voted out against Elizabeth Warren. But for Brown to win a Senate race in a state as liberal as Massachusetts, I mean, that is pretty impressive, even in the 2010s. However, he was probably going to win the nomination for 2026 in New Hampshire, if not for the fact that in just the last few days, John Sununu, a member of the Sununu family relative to Chris Sununu, John Sununu, a former U.S. Senator from 2003 to 2009, he has decided to also jump into this race. And so if he becomes a Republican nominee, he would probably perform better than Scott Brown. The Sununu family is very popular in New Hampshire, and so that is why the odds for Republicans jumped up in just the last few days. Republicans now at 21%, Democrats at 79%, and so this will bump New Hampshire down into the lean blue category. And with John Sununu potentially announcing his campaign in the next few weeks, the odds could continue to go up for Republicans, but for now, the Granite State will be lean blue. This is the 3rd lean blue state on our map. And we're actually going to come back down to the South once again, and we're going to now look at Texas, where Republicans are favored to retain control with a 78% chance that the GOP will hold on to the seat, but it's not necessarily going to be incumbent Republican John Cornyn, as we do have a very competitive primary here. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, is the favorite at a 55% chance. At one point, he had an 80% chance of being the nominee here, but over the last few months, the odds for John Cornyn have gone up slightly. He could actually end up being the nominee again. He's been in the Senate for over 2 decades now. A lot of people are tired of him, and so that is why he is facing such a real primary threat. But ultimately, no matter who it is, Republicans are the favorites here. The Lone Star State will be lean red, Texas at just under that 80% threshold. And we also have Florida going in favor of the GOP. This time it's Ashley Moody. She has a 73% chance at winning a full 6-year term. She was appointed earlier this year by Governor Ron DeSantis to fill the vacancy left by Marco Rubio, as he went on to become Trump's Secretary of State. And so Moody will very likely win a full term in the special election next year. And so Florida is going to be the third lean red state on our map. And the final lean state on this map will be Iowa, as in the last few weeks, Joni Ernst has announced that she will not be seeking re-election to a third term. She was not very popular in her home state, and so we will now have a pretty competitive primary on the Republican side to replace her, because ultimately whoever the GOP nominee is will very likely become the next U.S. Senator from the state of Iowa. Republicans currently have a 70% chance of winning, and so that will make the state the final lean state on our map, and it will of course go in favor of the GOP. And so we're now left with just 3 races: Ohio, Maine, and North Carolina. These are the 3 most competitive Senate races in the country. Now, this is rather surprising, as you would generally expect states like Michigan or Georgia to be the ones we cover at the end here. But Ohio, North Carolina, and Maine, this is a rather interesting group. We're going to begin in North Carolina. We're now going to fill in the tilt states, where either candidate will have between a 60 to a 70% chance of winning. And so starting off in the Tar Heel state, Democrats have a 65% chance of flipping the seat after incumbent Republican Thom Tillis has announced that he will not be seeking re-election. He was probably going to lose a primary if he had decided to run, and he will likely be replaced at the top of the GOP ticket by Michael Whatley, the former chair of the RNC. He has stepped down from the chairmanship in order to run for this seat. He has the support of President Trump, but Michael Whatley is a strong candidate on the Republican side. Meanwhile, for the Democrats, it's likely to be former Governor Roy Cooper, the very popular former Democratic governor of North Carolina, and he is the only reason why Democrats are favored here. And so ultimately, it's going to depend on how strong of a campaign Michael Whatley can run, because right now, it is Roy Cooper's race to lose. And so looking at the odds, we saw the odds jump up significantly for Democrats the moment that Cooper announced his campaign, and they now sit at 65-35. And so North Carolina will be the first tilt state on the map in favor of the Democrats. And now with just the final 2 states left, we're going to tackle Ohio first, where Republicans have a 64% chance of holding on to this seat. John Husted is technically the incumbent. He was appointed earlier this year by Governor Mike DeWine to fill the vacancy left by J.D. Vance when he became vice president. And so John Husted will likely run against Sherrod Brown. That is why the odds for Democrats here are so high. Sherrod Brown is, of course, a former 3-term senator who lost his seat in 2024 to Bernie Moreno by less than 4 points. He will very likely lose again, even though he is a former senator. He is still the best candidate Democrats could put up, but Ohio simply is too Republican of a state at this point. Trump won it by double digits in 2024, and that is why, despite Brown being in the race, Republicans have a 64% chance at holding onto the seat, and Husted winning a full term. And so Ohio will be tilt red, the final tilt state on this map. And that is because we are actually not going to place Maine into any category, simply because of how close it is. Maine is literally the closest state on the map, and it is literally a coin flip. Democrats have a 51% chance of winning, Republicans at 49. And this has been the case for quite a while now, as we still don't know whether or not Susan Collins will be running for a 6th term. Susan Collins has already won 5. She was reelected back in 2020 by a nearly 10-point margin, even though all the polls said that she would lose to Democrat Sarah Gideon. She is an incredibly strong candidate, being a Republican in Maine, and she was able to outperform Donald Trump by nearly 20 points in 2020. And so Susan Collins, she hasn't announced yet whether or not she will run again in 2026. She is certainly less popular now than she was 5 years ago. That will definitely hurt her, but if she does indeed run for re-election, her odds are going to spike. She will still likely be able to come out on top. I mean, her longevity in Maine has been very surprising, considering that when she first ran for Senate, she promised that she would only serve 2 terms. Susan Collins is now the longest serving member of Congress in Maine's history. Now, on the Democratic side, we have Janet Mills, the incumbent governor. She is really the only potential challenger that would be able to defeat Susan Collins, but at this point, we don't know if Mills is actually going to run, so there's a lot of uncertainty in this race. If Mills announces a campaign, the odds for the Democrats here are going to go up. If Susan Collins announces, it's going to go up for Republicans by an even greater amount. And so right now, due to all of this uncertainty, Maine is basically a perfect coin flip. Democrats at 51, Republicans at 49. It would be unfair for me to give a state that is so close to either one party. It is literally purely a toss-up. And so based on the betting market odds, Republicans are on track to win 51 seats at a minimum, Democrats 48 seats at a minimum, and Maine is the only toss-up on the map. This is according to the market odds on Kalshi. And so Republicans, according to this map, will be able to hold on to their Senate majority, potentially at 51 or 52 seats. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Tell me if you agree with this map. Who do you think will win in Maine, North Carolina, and Ohio? Subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.